He got an ATAR of 99.90. He got 6 in the state in English with an exam mark of 99.
You don't have time to fully flesh out absolutely everything.
Did you have a particular routine that was important for you?
Admittedly, I tried to establish a routine on day 1 of year 12, and I quickly learned that it just did not work out. In terms of study hours, generally would average around 7 to 8 usually per day. And a marker, if they read a really solid intro, they already have a really good impression of your essay. So then from there, it's a lot easier for them to sort of give marks.
If you could only choose one thing to do to study for each of your subjects, what would it be?
A really good approach that I thought of was
What's up everyone, it's Johnny from Jedel, and today I'm joined by Arnav, who did incredibly well in his HSC last year. So Arnav's been kind enough to join us to share his insights, his wisdom. He actually went incredibly well. He got an ATAR of 99.90, so basically right at the top of the state. He got 6 in the state in English with an exam mark of 99. That's 99 out of 100 for English Advanced. He got 97 overall for that subject, which gave him that rank of 6. And I was just chatting to him before this about his other subjects, just out of interest. 4-unit maths, 97, which is basically an unheard of mark. So welcome, Arnav. Very excited to kind of pick your brain today and help everyone who's watching. But congratulations, first of all. And how does it feel, and how did it feel to get those results?
it feels really surreal, honestly. I didn't expect it at all, especially for English. Growing up and throughout school, I've always been more of a maths person. So I put a lot more effort into maths relative to my other subjects, and I was really happy to see that kind of turn into something tangible and something that I was really proud of. For English, I put in a lot more effort around the tail end of my HSC journey, so I am glad to see it turn into something really surprising that I didn't expect. But yeah, overall, it's just a really awesome feeling that I have now finished the HSC and move on with my life to uni.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it was a bit of a surprise, as you say, for English. I know you were talking about maths being your kind of favorite subject. You always love maths, but let's think about and let's talk about how you cracked the code with English. What do you think it was that allowed you to go so well, even with it not being your preferred or favorite subject?
I tried to avoid memorizing essays as much as I could. I did memorize a couple of things, like for Module C, I memorized an imaginative and a little bit of a discursive, like scaffolds, not full text. I really believed in kind of just looking at past paper questions and mind mapping everything. By the time I got up to the HSC exam, I had like pages of just mind maps for each text and concepts and rubric unpacking. And I feel like if I could understand the text through mind mapping, then I didn't have to really try to memorize something, because I could easily adapt to a question that they presented me on the spot, since I had that sort of more intimate knowledge of the text. I think along with that, honestly, just talking to people about the text was really good. I had a really, really conversational and kind teacher in year 11 and 12, and she really kind of encouraged us to talk about the text and engage with the commentary that are presented. And I feel like that also really helped me just understand it to a deeper level.
Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of that preparation, so mind maps was a huge contributor to your understanding of preparation. Did you do a lot of past papers though? Did you actually go through the process of writing out practice responses though to get comfortable with that process?
Admittedly, no, simply just because I was being lazy. But no, I did lots of practice for short answer questions, because I always found that they were a slightly weaker point of mine, because interpreting complex text on the spot, I was a little bit more uncomfortable with. As for essays, I would generally practice writing introductions out, but I didn't like writing out whole essays for the sake of time, and also just because I found it to be a big pain. I really, for that reason, liked the mind mapping, because it allowed me to unpack everything I would write in a regular essay, and I could still write out, say, a fully fledged introduction, which signposts what I'm going to write in my essay, without actually having to write the essay. So it saves time, and it helps me unpack more concepts and more questions in that same time frame, which I really like.
Yeah, I like that approach. Very efficient. You were focusing your time on the intros when it came to actually writing out things in full. But in terms of that mind map, I just want to understand that, because it's a somewhat unique approach for English. And I'd like to understand how detailed they were. And because if someone's watching this, they might be thinking, okay, if I mind map it, how do I start the sentence? I don't know how to write the analysis. Like, how detailed were they, and how did that actually translate for you into these essentially perfect sentences in your essay?
It started off with kind of looking at the rubric and looking at, like, as an example, for the common module, I did 1984, and 1984 has sort of 3 to 6 more or less distinctive rubric points in that rubric that you're supposed to address, or that can be asked of you in an exam. So what you do is you kind of start with 1984 and you kind of branch out to those rubric points. And from there, it's sort of a bit of a self-guided process where you almost sort of talk to yourself and you're trying to reason with yourself as to what would naturally extend from that point. What kind of goes on from that rubric point? What would I next talk about? I kind of like to imagine it as if I was kind of giving a speech about 1984, and then I would kind of use that as a sort of springboard to just say, okay, what's the next logical step in an argument? And I feel like if I had that sort of logical progression in my head, then the sentences kind of just came to me naturally. It was then a matter of reading JSTOR articles and that kind of thing, because they had nice ways of wording things and that sort of thing, which obviously elevates the response and kind of gives it that sort of X factor that you wouldn't find otherwise. So I thought that, yeah, in mind mapping along with JSTOR articles kind of together gives you that conceptual understanding, but then also helps you write really nice things that English teachers tend to generally appreciate.
And that extra research, which is such an important thing, so I'm glad you brought it up, going to JSTOR, looking at Google Scholar, reading academic articles online, which everyone should be doing, to enhance your vocabulary and sophistication. What were you doing when you found something that you liked though? Did you note it down? Did it become part of the mind map? Did you write down these turns of phrase to then include yourself?
If I found something that really caught my eye, I would generally just kind of jot it down. And what I kind of did was every day I'd kind of just, eventually that list starts to accumulate, and then you kind of just read over that list. And as you keep on reading with it and engaging with it and actually understanding what that complicated language is saying, that kind of gets ingrained into your brain, and then that kind of just contributes to that sort of logical progression of the mind maps. And then after writing out intros, you kind of get that idea for how to write sentences, and I just feel like that kind of just naturally progressed.
So you were collecting all of this material in the form of mind maps, you're doing your research, you were going through the rubric, speaking things out loud. When it came to actually writing the essay, what was your approach with the structure? How many body paragraphs were you doing for each of the essays?
I did 3 body paragraphs for Common Module and Module B. And Module A, I did 4 body paragraphs because it was a comparative, so you had to kind of balance it out. It was a sort of, Module A was the tricky one because in the 4 body paragraphs, it was like a body paragraph focused on one text between the two, but then you also reference the other text just once to kind of show that potential conversation. Common Module and Module B were a lot more straightforward, yeah, with the 3 body paragraphs. And my discursives and imaginatives were kind of just all over the place with structure and experimentation. So, yeah.
And a lot of people wonder, how long does your essay need to be to get full marks? How long roughly were your essays?
Mine were on the shorter end, but that's probably also because I have slightly tinier handwriting. Generally, I wasn't going more than 6-ish pages. So it wasn't overly long, maybe 5 to 6. I think the longest one I had was Module A, obviously, and that was 7 of it. So they weren't very long, again, probably because of tiny handwriting, but also just because I feel like in the context of such a time-pressured exam like English, you don't have time to fully flesh out absolutely everything. And that's what my teacher used to tell me is the markers don't expect you to say absolutely everything about a text. They just want you to say important things that actually address the question. And if you can get that much going, then your essay is already answering the question and you're using good language and good analysis. So a marker is bound to like it.
Awesome. So about 6 handwritten pages on average. That's probably somewhere around 900 words.
It was around, I think, 1,000 to 1,100 about, so just a little bit more, yeah.
So that's the kind of the length of the essays and the structure. Anything else you were doing, structurally speaking, or in terms of preparation that you think helped set you apart? Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle, and if you want to check out state rank examples, Band 6 analysis, step-by-step guides to constructing the perfect essays, craft of writing pieces, whatever it is that you need for your English exams, then go to jettle.com. We've put everything in one place for you so that you don't need to look any further to get everything you need to succeed in your exams. And if you want to submit a draft and get expert marking, or you want to use our marking tools to get specific suggestions on how you can improve your essays, your creative writing pieces, anytime, anywhere, make sure you sign up to Jedi today.
Probably just really, again, coming back to the intros, I think I was trying to look at it through the perspective of a marker. And a marker, if they read a really solid intro, their impression of your essay is really good, or like they already have a really good impression of your essay. So then from there, it's a lot easier for them to sort of give marks in that sense. So I really tried to prioritize having a good intro, and even if that meant spending a little bit more time on it to get a really solid one down, I always thought that would have been a really good approach. I definitely think that with techniques, like literary devices, I do think that using slightly more unordinary ones did help at times. Just ones that you wouldn't typically expect out of the same, because there are quotes that people use that are very sort of common knowledge across the state. But I was like, in my mind, I was like, you can use those quotes, but then if you can try and find a slightly more sophisticated technique or angle in which you approach that quote, then you're going to stand out a bit more. And that was my thought. So I tried to find a mixture of slightly unique quotes that not many people would probably hopefully be able to find, and techniques that were slightly unordinary for more common quotes. And then you can kind of mix and match and see what works on the day.
And what's an example of a kind of unorthodox technique?
It's been a while now since I did this, but some like anadiplosis, like just little ones like rhetorical devices that you learn, especially in year 9, year 10. Those types of devices that can be applied to more public speaking and those types of things, you can also translate them into essays. And I feel like they also really help you stand out.
Yeah, so for anyone listening, just go to Google, look up rhetorical devices, and what you'll find is a lot of specific types of repetition. So instead of saying repetition, you can say the specific type that applies in that context, for instance, anadiplosis in that example. So I think that's a really good point. Specific techniques are always going to be better than the more general ones. And that's a really easy way to stand out. You just got to do that little bit of extra research to get the specific terminology right. What about with turns of phrase? Like, I remember when I was going through the HSC, me and a couple of my friends who used to help each other, we used to be obsessed with, these particular conceptual statements, and, it was quite nerdy, but it was actually very satisfying to be researching via JSTOR, via these articles, to find these really nice turns of phrase and to include them and rework them into our essays. Is there anything that you remember that you can give as an example so people get an understanding for that kind of flair or sophistication when it comes to the concepts?
I probably don't remember too much of it now. I can try, but I think that sort of remembering of phrases and that kind of thing, I think that really helps for more critically focused modules like Module B, where I did Elliot. So with Elliot, there's lots of specific terminology that you can use, things like just fragmentation and specific words like that. Internal monologue. What else? Probably forgotten a few of them now. It's been a while, but yeah, just little words like that. I feel they can really help. Self-reflexive, and you kind of just pick up on these words as your teacher says it. You read them on JSTOR, and I feel like when I see a word like that, I'm naturally intrigued and I want to use it. So then I look it up, and then it kind of just stays in your memory bank, and eventually you can pick it out and use it in an essay. Yeah. And
in terms of your specific paragraphs in the structure, just to zoom in on those to help students listen in. With the introduction, how would you generally go about structuring your introductions in terms of, sentence 1 through to 4 or 5? How long were they? Where was that thesis statement? How did you go about that?
I tried to limit my introductions to no more than for common module and module C, I generally went for about 150, 160 words. And then module A, slightly longer, 180, which you're dealing with 2 texts. I think for all of them, I tried to start with a slightly interesting or kind of unique opening, like a first sentence that it answers the question. And I do think it's important to use the words of the question directly, but you kind of use them in a way that's integrated with that sort of more unique sentence structure. And if you start your first sentence with that, the marker's already in their mind thinking of it as a slightly more advanced essay. And then from there, my second sentence would be context, and then I start to unpack the text I'm doing one by one. And if I had time in an exam, I'd add a little concluding statement to the introduction, but it really didn't matter. I don't think that really makes a difference.
And what about the body paragraphs? How did you structure that? Was it just one topic sentence, then you got straight into the analysis, or did you have kind of a multi-sentence topic sentence before going into the first quote?
I would generally do a conceptually focused first sentence. And then, especially again, as an example for Elliot, that second sentence would always be context, but you'd link that context to something specific from the text. So generally, I would say something, I remember for one of the poems, you say something like the fragmented form of the poem mirrors, and then you talk about, say, the aftermath of World War I. And you say how that fragmentation it's reflected both historically and textually. And I feel like then you're referencing context, but you're taking it that step further by linking it to the text. And then from there, it kind of just comes down to your own way of doing quotes and analysis. I generally went for, at the bare minimum, four quotes. I generally didn't have time to do more than 5. So I generally stay in that 4 to 5, sometimes maybe 6 if they were shorter quotes. And then just a concluding sentence that I generally like to tie that context back to, and then reference concept end again. So it's a bit of a top and tail sort of.
Oh, that makes sense. And just to clarify that as well, you're saying, for instance, with the Elliot, you would start with just the idea, just the concept in the first sentence, then you would bring in the context specific to Elliot, and you would also connect that to something probably to do with form of the text. Then in your third sentence, that's when you're bringing in the first quote that you're going to deconstruct, and then so on until you get to a link sentence. With the conceptual statement, are you mentioning Elliot at all? Because that's module B, it's specific to that. Did you still say something about Elliot in the first sentence in the conceptual?
Elliot as a person, or?
Yeah, did you mention the name Elliot? Or
I generally try to limit that more to the context. It really depends on the poems for Elliot as well. Like with Journey of the Magi, for instance, it's this entire idea of his kind of realization to kind of maybe adopt a sort of Anglican perspective. So maybe in that sense, you can maybe reference topic sentence. That I feel comes down to personal preference. But I tried to generally talk more about the text itself in that first sentence. Because the essay fundamentally, I feel, is more about the text than the person. Like the author is important, the composer is important, but I feel like the text itself and unpacking that text in more detail is probably, it's the highlight of that essay. So I kind of focused on that more.
So would you, in that first sentence, mention a specific poem then and introduce the concept?
Yeah, so I did paragraph per poem and you pick out 3. I think the generally accepted structure that most people go with in terms of the poem chronology is Prufrock, then Holloman, and then Journey. Some people I know like to use Preludes and Rhapsody. I personally didn't really like either of them, so I really wanted to use the other 3. And my question allowed me to use those 3. But yeah, I think those 3 poems are probably the 3 most approachable ones and moldable ones for a question that's given in the HSC. So yeah, I centered my revision around those 3. But I still had a little bit prepared for the other 2 just in case something popped up or if they prescribed a poem or something.
Awesome. And then looking at the craft of writing, you said you did prepare a couple of drafts for that. What are your other tips for preparing for the craft of writing module C?
I think it comes down to just having some solid ideas. I think having an original idea, I think kind of takes precedence because in module C, the markers are mainly looking at you for authenticity and originality. So as an example, I had a couple of prepared things, one I think on chaos and one on something else, but it didn't really align with the question at all. So I couldn't use it. I couldn't use it for my discursive. So I had to write something on the spot. So I kind of just took elements from basically everything over the last 2 years of school. And I kind of just meshed it into this one thing. So I started with, standing at the edge of a cliff. And then I talked about playing with fire. And I did this entire thing. It kind of just happened on the spot. And, I don't remember exactly what it was now, but it kind of just had this progression and, then from playing with fire to reading a book. And then, it just kind of went on this thing. And I feel like if you can engage with a lot of ideas in an exam under that pressure, something is going to come to you. And most of the time, if it's an original idea and it's worthy of answering the question, I honestly think just go for it. If you're not 100% confident and you're prepared to answer the question, then maybe originality is just the way to go because it doesn't have to be. I don't think the markers are looking for something that's picture perfect, 0 errors. I think they're just looking for something that's a little bit more authentic, written on the spot, and kind of really answers that question in lots of detail and in a unique way.
And in terms of the writing itself, ideas aside, how did you develop that flair and sophistication? How did you make use of the prescribed texts?
So my prescribed text in module C was Spotty-Handed Villainesses, Margaret Atwood. So it was nice that it was a more rhetorical piece, not so much imaginative, and then we were assigned a discursive for our HSC. So that worked out nicely. It kind of just showed me different ways in which you can make an argument. I think that's the beauty of that piece, that it does that in so many different ways, and you see so many different approaches because the one piece talks about kind of the same concept. I didn't try to annotate the piece because I didn't think that would be worth my time, but I did kind of read through it and just kind of jot down a couple of useful things that I feel like Atwood did that I could maybe apply to my piece. And if I did have a reflection in my HSC, I would have talked about that.
Awesome. And then section 1, you said you did a lot of practice questions. You actually sat down and did those. How many papers would you have done for that, and any tips?
I did all the HSC papers for the new syllabus, and I did a few trials here and there. It probably came to about in between 10 to 12 maybe papers, like section 1s. I really just did them out of apprehension, to be honest, because I was just worried that I wouldn't be able to do it on the spot on the day. So my entire mindset was, if I can tell myself that that I've at least done enough practice, then from there it kind of just naturally follows, and maybe I'll be a little bit more confident in the exam. Because I don't think it was always really my forte to understand the text fully. Because when I think back to even my own HSC exam, the final short answer question was this one about, I think, family dynamics. To this day, I still don't understand what that text is fully talking about, and I still found it a little bit challenging. But I feel like short answer questions, they prioritize literary analysis and techniques more than anything else in class making, and you can kind of interpret that through context, even if you don't fully understand the text. And that's kind of the logic I went in with, because it was a bit of a mental failsafe for me in case something didn't work out.
Yeah, that's really good strategy, good point. I think best way to prepare for section 1 is to do practice questions and just to keep working through them. I mean, you did 10 to 12, so that shows kind of the level of kind of practice, but also the will that it takes to really ensure that you're fully prepared for any type of question. So much respect for how much you did to prepare for that one. And I think that's a really important point. You don't need to understand all of the text in full or any of the text in full. You just need to be able to pick out certain features, certain techniques, explain what their effect is in relation to the question, and you can get the marks. So I think that's wise advice for section 1 as well. Now, looking more generally at the study approach, a lot of people are going to be thinking, you got a 99.90 ATAR, so you basically got right at the top of the state. How many hours a day were you studying? And let's just look at the process before the exam, and then we can talk more generally.
In terms of study hours, generally would average around, let's say 7 to 8 usually per day. It wasn't more of I didn't really set myself a time goal in that sense. It kind of just got to the point where I was just doing work, and I realized that there's a lot to do. You have to get it done. So the best thing to do is just to avoid distractions and do it. Having said that, there were some days where I genuinely just felt like coming home and sleeping and doing absolutely nothing. And so I did often try and take a little nap, sometimes when I got home, or just have a snack or watch an episode of TV or something to kind of relax my mind before I kind of get back into it. And I feel like that's really important, having a little bit of balance and a bit of a break beforehand. I think I used to work better around night, so I'd stay up a little bit sometimes. I tried to do that mostly the night before an exam. So the night before an exam, I'd sleep on time, but the night before that, I'd stay up quite late and just make sure I'm really confident. And that way, I feel like I've gotten in that extra preparation time, but I've also slept on time for my exam and won't be entirely tired right before, and I can think properly. So
yeah, great. And in terms of structuring that day, say you're doing an 8-hour study day, how many subjects would you be looking at, and did you have a particular routine that was important for you?
Admittedly, I tried to establish a routine on day 1 of year 12, and I quickly learned that it just did not work out. And I couldn't follow it. So I kind of eventually just kind of freeballed it and sort of went, what's important today? And I think a really good approach that I thought of at the time, which in hindsight might not have been the best for every subject I did, but it worked in some aspects, was whenever I felt like procrastinating, I would lean back on one subject that I knew I could just do without having to think of anything else. So for me, as an example, I really did not enjoy studying physics. So whenever I had to do physics, and say I was getting a little bit bored of it or didn't really want to do it, I'd push myself to do as much as I could. But then I'd also, at a point where I realized I'm not actually doing anything useful and I'm just wasting my time, I'd stop doing physics, I'd pull out some maths, I'd just practice some maths. And then when my mind's a little bit more clear, I'd go back to physics. So I feel like everyone inherently has at least one subject where they're a little bit more comfortable, they're a little bit happier, I'd say, doing that subject, the subject they enjoy the most. And if you can really prioritize that and really focus on that, especially when you feel like procrastinating, even if it's just doing it for 10, 15 minutes just to reset your mind, I think that's really useful, because it meant that I managed to get a lot of productive physics study done, but I did it with breaks, and I still made use of those breaks by doing something else related to my HSC. So it was kind of a win-win in that sense.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that I think students will find really interesting. If you could only choose one thing to do to study for each of your subjects, what would it be? So we're going to go through English, maths, physics, chemistry. Pick one thing to do to prepare for the exam. It can only be one type of study. For instance, doing mind maps, or writing a draft, or doing X amount of past papers. What's that one thing you found to be most effective for each of your subjects, starting with English, then we'll do maths, and then the sciences?
Yeah, I think English, definitely mind mapping. I think if you have that really good conceptual understanding, everything else should hopefully follow. Because I also found that just, like I said, talking to friends and that kind of thing, but that's only useful if you've mind mapped, because then you're actually able to kind of talk and build that discussion and understand really to its core what that text is about. For maths, I think it just comes down to non-stop grinding, just doing past papers and just really working through it and trying to see and tackle and approach as many questions as you can. Because if you have that experience, you build your intuition and you build foresight, and then that helps you tackle the harder questions in an exam, or at least helps you see more intuitive ways of approaching a question in an exam that could give you, a really nice solution. And then for physics and chemistry, I really think spaced repetition was the most important thing. With the sciences, and I didn't do biology, but I know for biology as well, they have so much content in them, and a lot of year 11 can carry over as well. And so I feel like the best way to manage all that is just to do spaced repetition. Every day, well, I'd honestly just read over my notes. I really believed in a solid note-taking system for physics and chemistry. And my notes weren't exactly short. I kind of write everything out, full sentences, and I'd made them really detailed. And I did that because I felt like then by the end of it, it was just really easy to do, spaced repetition, read over it. And I felt like if I could write out my notes fully fledged, using the wording that I would use in an exam, because they have so much terminology, then that terminology also more naturally came to me, ways of writing out definitions that make you sound smarter and things like that, So I thought that was really useful. But yeah, just reading over your notes sort of every day, tackling just a small syllabus dot point. And by the time you get to the HSC, you'll understand as much of it as you can, and you'll have a really good in-depth understanding of it. Yeah. It's sort of, you would look at, say, a dot point about module 6 chemistry, acids and bases, right? You'd look at a dot point about that, and then you would, process it, you'd understand it, then you give it a day off, and there may be other names for this method. I call it spaced repetition. The following day, then you would then, look at it again, and then 2 days down the line, you try and look at it again, and say I now forgot what an acid was or what a base was. I would then have to look at it again, and I'd then you kind of start spacing out the time between reviewing, and that way it's stuck in your long-term memory, which is really important for the HSC. And anything you forget, you instantly review, you'd write it down, you'd figure out any other way of memorizing or learning it. And then, because I feel like, especially for chemistry, I liked to have sort of scaffolds for the way I would answer things. There were specific types of questions in chemistry, ones about, say, Le Chatelier's principle. If they wanted you to, what would happen in the system if you made this disturbance or this change? There's a very, standard formula in the way you write principles answers, or spectroscopy questions, and you answer those in a very point systematic manner. And I just feel like having those scaffolds in my brain also kind of saved me time from planning out a response as much, and just knowing how to answer a question on the fly. And even if it takes, you kind of save time up to the end of the exam to review your answers and check silly mistakes, which happens a lot in those subjects.
And was handwriting a big part of that process then? Were you doing all these notes handwritten?
I wrote on an iPad. So I thought that was just mainly because if I didn't have an iPad, I would have done handwritten. I just did on an iPad because I thought I could then access them anywhere. I wrote them on OneNote, and then I could just kind of view them on my laptop, on my phone, on the train, anywhere I needed to. And anytime, I thought to myself, hey, I don't actually fully understand this, just go back to the notes, see, oh, this is the answer. And then it's just easy of access, really. And it just kind of helps because you can then it helps you see it anywhere, even if you it doesn't limit you to one place at which you can study. You can study really anywhere you need to. And before the stress of an exam, I feel like that's really useful to do.
Oh, nice. And I was also curious, how many past papers do you think you did for maths? Because you did so well in extension maths. What was kind of the number leading up to the HSC?
Past papers, I probably did for extension 2. For the HSC, for that one, I would have done about 20 to 25. And for extension 1, I would have done about 15 to 20.
Wow. So there's a lot of papers, but as you say, that's the most important thing to do to ensure that you're ready for any type of question in the exam.
The more challenging papers, because a lot of friends, my school class had a bit of a system where we kind of, we tell each other, about hard papers and that kind of thing. So if there was a hard question from a paper, it's like, oh, what paper was that from? Okay, I'll give that paper a try. And then in that sense, that sort of communal approach kind of helped us all find harder papers. And so unsurprisingly, those papers often came from, James Russell, Sydney Boys, the top selective schools. And I felt like, in my mind, I thought if I could tackle those papers and do relatively okay, then maybe I'll be a little bit more confident towards the HSC. Because if you approach the really hard stuff in maths, then the stuff in the HSC, which hopefully won't always be as difficult, should seem a little bit more approachable. That was my mindset.
And just on that point of collaboration and speaking to other people about problems, even for English, say, was getting feedback and kind of discussing things and getting people to edit your work and help you, was that an important part of your process?
Yeah, I had my teacher, who I had for year 11 and 12, advanced and extension. She gave me lots of feedback and she was always willing to help look through stuff whenever I needed. So I'd send the stuff, she'd get it back to me, she'd give feedback, and that entire process was just really useful. I think I didn't probably show a lot to my friends simply out of just embarrassment's sake, honestly, but I think it was also just, I talked more ideas with them. I talked more sort of approaches to things with them and conceptual understandings with them. Because again, that also comes back to the mind maps and being able to then add to them, and you kind of get to see everything that could possibly be written in an essay all on that one page. And I feel like, or on the 2 pages or whatever, and I feel that probably makes it probably adds a little bit of ease of information access in that sense, because you can kind of just see everything there and you can scour the mind map for an important concept and you pick it out, you can write in your essay, you have the nice wording there, and it just kind of comes together. And I feel like talking to friends in that sense, rather than feedback, talking to them to add to my notes was probably useful as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. So thank you very much for all your insights, Arnav. Do you have any final kind of words of advice for the students doing year 12 now, or maybe students who are in the younger years? What's your kind of general advice, if any, for students going through school now?
I reckon just try to avoid burning out and try to take it systematic. I think, like I said, having that fail-safe subject whenever you feel like procrastinating is really good to have. And I feel like not everything can be sorted through just mindless paper mashing. I think you need to, at some point, sit down and just kind of properly understand a topic. And if you can understand that topic, then hopefully you'll be able to answer more questions on it anyway. And it saves you time and you get that better understanding as well.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for everyone watching. Thanks for tuning in. If you did enjoy, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Check out jedl.com if you want help with resources and feedback and marking. Otherwise, Arnav, thank you very much for being on here. It's been a pleasure learning about your processes. Good luck with the future. And to everyone else, thank you very much. See you in the next one.